What's good? This Made Media Magazine checking in. Please hit that like button, hit that share, and subscribe if you ain't subscribed to my channel. Don't forget to leave a comment and hit that bell so you be notified next time I go live or drop a video. Much love, y'all. Peace.
Surviving Diddy. This is the federal paperwork. All the pages. The link is in the description. Make sure y'all hit that like button, hit that share, and subscribe. This Made Media Magazine.
This litigation arises from or relates to the tortious activities defendants visited upon defendants in the states of New York, California, Florida, and the United States Virgin Islands. This tortious conduct violated United States federal RICO laws, requiring defendants to litigate these claims in this district does not offend traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice. Plaintiffs' claims arise from some conduct occurring by defendants in New York. Parties. Plaintiff Rodney Jones is an American artist and music producer. Mr. Jones resides in the states of New York and California. Defendant Sean Combs is a rapper and record executive popularly known by his stage names Puff Daddy, Puffy, P. Diddy, Diddy, Brother Love, or Love. Mr. Combs came to fame in the early 1990s with his record label Bad Boy Records. He rose to prominence in the music and entertainment industry over the decades and is regularly referred to as a hip-hop mogul. Mr. Combs resides at 200 South Mapleton Drive, Beverly Hills, California, 90024. I have a picture of him here. Not a great picture either. Defendant Sean Combs. Defendant Justin Dior Combs is the son of Mr. Combs and Misa Hilton. Jay Combs was born on December 30th, 1993. Jay Combs is a producer and actor. He has appeared on TV series like Catfish, the TV show Wild and Out, and Hip Hop Squares. Defendant Justin Dior Combs resides at 1550 North El Centro Ave, Los Angeles, California, 90028. Another picture. Defendant Justin Dior Combs. Defendant Lucian Charles Grange is the CEO of Defendant Universal Music Group. Defendant Lucian Charles Grange resides at 53551 Ross Ave, Unit 34A, La Quinta, California, 92253, and 668 Chautauqua Boulevard, Pacific Palisades, California, 90272. And this is Lucian Charles Grange picture. Defendant Ethiopia Habtemariam is the former CEO of Defendant Motown Records, the parent company of Defendant Love Records. Defendant Habtemariam resides at 13701 Riverside Drive, apartment 8th floor, Sherman Oaks, California, 91423-2430. There's a picture of Ethiopia. 10. Defendant Christina Corium is the Chief of Staff to Sean Diddy Combs Global Enterprises. She resides at 10445 Wilshire Boulevard, apartment 501, Los Angeles, California, 90024. Christina Corium, Chief of Staff to Sean Diddy Combs. 11. Defendant Chalice Records Studios is a popular recording studio located at 845 Highland Ave, Los Angeles, California, 90038, United States. 12, defendant Motown Records is a record label with a principal place of business located at 1750 Vine Street, Los Angeles, California. Ethiopia. Habter Miriam was the chairman and CEO of Universal Music Group's Motown Records. Then we have defendant Universal Music Group is a record label with a principal place of business located at 2220 Colorado Avenue in Santa Monica, California. Lucian Grange is the chairman and CEO of Universal Music Group. Then we have Defendant Love Records is a record label with the principal place of business located at 6255 Sunset Boulevard, Suite 713 in Los Angeles, California, United States 90028. Defendant Love Records was founded by Mr. Combs and Defendant Motown Records. Then Defendant Combs Enterprises is a diverse portfolio of businesses and investments that includes music, fashion, fragrance, beverage, marketing, film, television, and media properties. They have a principal place of business located in New York, New York. Rodney Little Rod Jones Jr. is from the Windy City, Chi-Town. He was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. Mr. Jones is the second oldest son and fourth child out of 9 siblings. Mr. Jones comes from a long line of gospel music influencers. Mr. Jones started playing instruments at the age of 5. He began playing drums in church, and at the age of 13, he picked up playing the guitar. From 13 to present day, Mr. Jones has taught himself to play over 13 instruments. Mr. Jones is considered a musical prodigy. His talents have led him to produce and create a commercial marketplace for music that has been recorded by some of the most prestigious and highly acclaimed artists in music history. Throughout the duration of his career, Mr. Jones has worked the south side of Chicago music scene, playing with the following legendary greats: Georgia Mass Choir, Donald Lawrence, the Clark Sisters, and the Smoky Norfolk. On or about August 2022, Mr. Jones received a call from Mr. Combs requesting that he produce several songs on a rhythm and blues album titled The Love Album, Off the Grid Love Album. Mr. Jones agreed, and his life has been detrimentally impacted ever since. From September 2022 to November 2023, Mr. Jones produced 9 songs on Mr. Combs' Love album. Mr. Jones lived with Mr. Combs for months at a time, spending holidays, birthdays, and missing major family events. Mr. Jones resided at Mr. Combs' residence located in Los Angeles, California, New York City, and Miami, Florida. Mr. Jones also spent several weeks on a yacht rented by Mr. Combs in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Throughout his time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones witnessed, experienced, and endured many things that went far beyond his role as a producer on the Love album. The claims raised in this complaint have been corroborated through witness statements, video, audio recordings, and images that Mr. Jones has in his possession. Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to record him constantly. On several occasions, Mr. Combs took Mr. Jones' cell phone and began recording himself. As a result, Mr. Jones has secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in serious illegal activity. Mr. Jones has secured irrefutable evidence of the acquisition, use, and distribution of ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms. The displaying and distribution of unregistered illegal firearms. Mr. Combs provided laced alcoholic beverages to minors and sex workers at his homes in California, New York, and U.S. Virgin Islands and Florida. Mr. Combs' Chief of Staff, Christina Coram, KK, instructing her staff to retrieve drugs so she can provide it to Mr. Combs for his consumption. Christian Combs drugging and sexually assaulting a woman. Mr. Combs detailing how he planned to leverage his relationship with Bishop T.D. Jakes to soften the impact on his public image of Cassie Ventura's lawsuit. Young Miami's cousin and or assistant sexually assaulting Mr. Jones. Actor Cuba Gooding Jr. sexually harassing and assaulting Mr. Jones. Rapper redacted on Mr. Combs' yacht, consorting with underage girls, sex workers, and R&B singer redacted in Mr. Combs' Los Angeles home, consorting with underage girls and sex workers. Wow. Chalice Recording Studio shooting. On or about September 12, 2022, Mr. Combs held a writers and producers camp at Chalice Recording Studios at 845 Highland Ave, Los Angeles, California, 90038. Present at this camp were Mr. Combs, his son Justin Combs, and Justin's friend named G. Mr. G is a 30-year-old, tall African-American male. In addition to these individuals, other musicians were present at the camp. This writer has spoken to several musicians who attended the camp. One evening during this camp, Mr. Combs, J. Combs, and G were in a heated conversation. That conversation was moved out of the studio and into a restroom adjacent to where Mr. Jones was sitting. Mr. Jones was approximately 2 feet away from the bathroom when gunshots rang out. Mr. Jones recalls hearing multiple gunshots. Mr. Jones immediately went into a state of shock and feared that he would be shot next. Mr. Jones genuinely believed that he would be shot through the door due to how close he was. After the shooting ended, a crowd gathered around the restroom. When the door finally opened, Mr. Combs and J. Combs exited. G was lying on the restroom floor in a fetal position, holding his stomach and bleeding out of his leg/hip area. Everyone stood around looking upon G, frustrated by the lack of aid to G. Mr. Jones dropped everything, ran to G, and immediately began placing pressure on G's gunshot wound to his stomach. As he was applying pressure on his stomach, Mr. Jones realized that G was gushing blood from another area near his leg/hip. He decided to lift G and placed him to sit on the toilet. Mr. Jones asked the crowd to call the ambulance. Mr. Jones lifted G and brought him to the ambulance at the studio's front. At this time, Mr. Combs and Justin disappeared to another part of the studio. Mr. Combs gave strict instructions to inform the police that he had nothing to do with the shooting. He also forced Mr. Jones to lie to the police by telling them that G was shot standing outside the studio by a drive-by assailant. And then there's I guess ads from where it happened, when it happened. Mr. Jones has several corroborating witnesses who spoke with this writer anonymously due to fear of retaliation from Mr. Combs. They have agreed to speak publicly when subpoenaed. Mr. Jones has the clothing he wore that day and believes it may still have the stains and DNA of G's blood. The following are screenshots of the aftermath of the restroom where G was shot by either Mr. Combs or J. Combs. Clearly, G was not shot outside of the studio as Mr. Combs instructed his team to report to law enforcement. Mr. Combs and defendants LR, MR, UMG, and CRS provided private security for the writers' camp and defendant CRS. The security was porous and lackluster at best. The fact that either Mr. Combs and J. Combs were allowed to enter CRS with guns and those guns were not confiscated by security is a clear breach of duty by Mr. Combs, defendants LR, MR, and UMG to protect Mr. Jones and the other attendees of this writer's camp. As a result of this shooting, Mr. Jones is severely traumatized. Mr. Jones now suffers from PTSD, severe anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Throughout his time living with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was the victim of constant unsolicited and unauthorized groping and touching of his anus by Mr. Combs. These events took place in LA, New York, Florida, and the United States Virgin Islands. In addition to the unsolicited and unauthorized touching, Mr. Jones was forced by Mr. Combs to work in Mr. Combs' bathroom.
All right, my bad. Hold on. We gotta cut that part out.
You're stupid.
No Diddy.
I was on the roll.
Okay, keep going. Hell yeah, over 17 minutes. Yep, 18 minutes. Keep.
Okay. Where was I? Oh. Mr. Combs' bathroom as Mr. Combs walked around naked and showered in a clear glass enclosure. As a heterosexual Christian man, Mr. Jones was uncomfortable with Mr. Combs' advances and expressed his discomfort to Mr. Combs' Chief of Staff, Christina Coram, KK. KK responded to Mr. Jones' complaint with, you know how Sean will be Sean. KK also attempted to downplay Mr. Combs' groping of Mr. Jones' anus and genitals as friendly horseplay, stating that those acts were Mr. Combs' way of showing that he likes you, Mr. Jones. Despite these assurances on several occasions, when Mr. Combs began to undress and walk around his house naked, KK would say, "Okay, I'm leaving now," and she would disappear. KK's hypocrisy is breathtaking at best or enabling at worst. Mr. Jones believes that KK aided and abetted Mr. Combs' sexual assault of him and was working with Mr. Combs to groom him into accepting a homosexual relationship. Through these sexually deviant acts, one would say Mr. Combs has a pattern of and practice of engaging in such nefarious activity. This ongoing conduct shows that Mr. Combs cannot be rehabilitated. Whoa. Mr. Combs attempted to groom Mr. Jones into engaging in gay sex. Mr. Combs was aware that Mr. Jones looked up to and idolized music producer Stephen Aaron Jordan, Stevie J. Stevie J is an American DJ, record producer, and television personality. Stevie J was part of the Bad Boy record production team, The Hitmen. In 1997, Stevie J won a Grammy Award for his work on Puff Daddy's debut album. Throughout the late 1990s, Stevie J produced for several artists including Mariah Carey, Tevin Campbell, The Notorious B.I.G., 112, Jodeci, Faith Evans, Jay-Z, and Eve. Stevie J was one of the producers on the Love album. Mr. Combs used access to Stevie J and his knowledge of Mr. Jones' admiration of Stevie J to groom and entice Mr. Jones to engage in homosexuality. Mr. Combs went so far as to share a video of Stevie J anally penetrating a Caucasian male without a condom. This was done to ease Mr. Jones's anxiety concerning homosexuality. According to Mr. Combs, this is normal practice in the music industry. Look, even Stevie J is doing it. Mr. Combs informed Mr. Jones that he had engaged in sexual intercourse with rapper, redacted, R&B singer, redacted, and Stevie J. Mr. Combs promised to make sure that Mr. Jones wins Producer of the Year at the Grammys if he engaged in homosexuality. The following are screenshots of the video of Stevie J anally penetrating a Caucasian male that Mr. Combs provided to Mr. Jones.
Oh my God. I'm sickening.
Thanksgiving 2022. Mr. Jones is sexually assaulted by Young Miami's cousin. On Thanksgiving Day 2022, Mr. Jones was in Mr. Combs' house located in Miami, Florida. Young Miami and her female cousins were also present. Mr. Combs was intoxicated and offered cocaine to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones rejected him and proceeded to walk to the restroom. While using the restroom, Young Miami's cousin burst into the bathroom and began groping Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs sent her in there to sexually assault Mr. Jones. As she entered the bathroom, she dropped to her knees and began performing oral sex on Mr. Jones' exposed penis. Mr. Jones pushed her away and exited the bathroom. Young Miami's cousin did not accept Mr. Jones' rejection, as she proceeded to follow Mr. Jones out of the bathroom. She started undressing and attempted to straddle him and have sex with him in the presence of Mr. Combs and his staff. Once again, Mr. Jones pushed her off, and the following images from the video of Young Miami, her cousin, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Combs. Mr. Jones and Mr. Combs on Thanksgiving Day, right before Mr. Combs invites Mr. Jones into the restroom and attempted to force him to take cocaine. Young Miami and her female cousin who sexually assaulted Mr. Jones on Thanksgiving Day, 2022.
He was a sissy, but whatever. I mean,
When they said cousin, I thought it was a dude. I was like, was it a guy who tried to sexually assault him? I didn't know it was a female. Trafficking.
imagine that.
She go down and she's trying to suck
Sexual
him.
assault.
And he's like,
I can't do nothing.
oh no. Well, I mean, he says that he's a Christian and he doesn't do things like that.
But if you seen a picture of him, you'd be like, yeah, he's asking. He had some braids going to the side, though. All of them was going to the side. Come on, man.
Throughout his time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was transported from California to New York, Florida, and the United States Virgin Islands. During this time, Mr. Jones was forced to solicit sex workers and perform sex acts to the pleasure of Mr. Combs. On or about February 4th, 2023, Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to bring prostitutes and sex workers back to his home in Miami, Florida. The sex workers that Mr. Combs forced Mr. Jones to bring back. On or about February 2nd, 2023 incident, Mr. Jones believes Mr. Combs drugged him. Mr. Jones recalls waking up naked, dizzy, and confused. He was in bed with two sex workers and Mr. Combs. He also recalls aimlessly wandering around the house with no clothes on. On another occasion in Miami, Florida, on Thanksgiving night of 2022, Mr. Combs asked Mr. Jones and DeForest Taylor to enter the studio bathroom. He asked them for a $100 bill because he wanted them to do cocaine with him. Mr. Jones was scared, but luckily he didn't have a $100 bill. So Mr. Combs waited a little later to do coke with Young Miami. Later that evening, he required Mr. Jones to solicit sex workers from Booby Trap on the river located at 3615 Northwest South River Drive, Miami, Florida 33142. Mr. Jones did so, and Mr. Combs forced him to engage in unsolicited sex acts with these workers. I don't understand why he kept doing it if he didn't want to. Why didn't he leave? No one was forcing him to stay there. As part of Mr. Jones' sex worker recruitment tools, Mr. Combs provided Mr. Jones with an exclusive bad boy baseball cap and required him to wear it to Booby Trap on the river as a signal to any sex worker he approached that Mr. Combs was in town and had sent Mr. Jones to recruit them. Mr. Jones had no desire to visit Booby Trap on the river. Mr. Jones had no desire to solicit sex workers from Booby Trap on the river. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to intimidate and force Mr. Jones into soliciting sex workers from Booby Trap on the river. As detailed below, Mr. Combs used many tactics to maintain dominion and control of Mr. Jones. Apparently, these workers were accustomed to servicing Mr. Combs and would know that he's in town by the sight of the bad boy's baseball cap. The following are Instagram profiles of two of the sex workers that Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to solicit and have sex with at his home in Miami, Florida. Mr. Jones had no desire to solicit and or have sex with the individuals in the previous paragraph. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to intimidate and force Mr. Jones into soliciting and sleeping with these women. The following is the phone number of another sex worker that Mr. Combs required Mr. Jones to solicit and perform sex acts with at his home in Miami, Florida. Mr. Jones had no desire to solicit and or have sex with the individual in the previous paragraphs. Mr. Combs used his power and influence to intimidate and force Mr. Jones into soliciting and sleeping with the individuals above. Mr. Combs used many tactics to maintain dominion and control of Mr. Jones. He promised him a Grammy for Producer of the Year for the Love album. He offered him $250,000 to purchase all the instruments he wanted. He promised him ownership of his $20 million property, One Star Island in Miami, Florida. He promised access to record labels, executives like defendants Lucian Charles Grange in Ethiopia, Miriam. I don't know how to say her name. I did my best. Mr. Combs would often switch up his approach. He would go from promising Mr. Jones to the world to threatening Mr. Jones with physical harm. Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones' face and informed Mr. Jones that he is willing to kill his mother, Janice Combs, if he must in order to get what he wants, so he would think twice to harm Mr. Jones. Mr. Combs and J. Combs solicits drugs and engages in illicit sex acts with minors and sex workers. On or about July 2nd, 2023 in California, Mr. Combs had a listening party at his home. Present at this party was a R&B artist, redacted, J. Combs, sex workers, and some underage girls. The event began at 7 p.m. Mr. Combs requested female sex workers and required Mr. Jones to solicit them. An hour later, several sex workers appeared. In addition to sex workers, there were at least 5 women in the crowd that were under the age of 16. Mr. Combs was forced all the women to drink laced DeLeon liquor. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs laced the liquor with ecstasy. Mr. Combs did not check the identification of any of these underage girls. The presence of these underage women made Mr. Jones very uncomfortable. He attempted to leave, and Mr. Combs forced him to stay. Mr. Combs went so far as to take Mr. Jones's car keys to prevent him from leaving. After being forced to drink Lace de Leon shots, Mr. Jones began feeling lightheaded and recalls passing out and waking up at 4 a.m. the following morning, naked with a sex worker sleeping next to him. Screenshots of a video from that night is embedded below.
It looked like he was having fun. That's
Mr.
Diddy.
Combs with the underage female.
Okay.
Underage female sex worker. Justin Combs with an underage female.
Predators.
Mr. Combs attempts to pass off Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. Oh my gosh.
They got pictures of that nigga too. Dumb bit now.
Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs was grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. During the introduction, Mr. Combs suggested that Cuba get to know Mr. Jones better. He then left them alone in a makeshift studio on the yacht. As evidenced by a video of which screenshots are embedded below, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and following Mr. Jones' legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, the small of his back near his buttocks, and his shoulders. Mr. Jones was extremely uncomfortable and proceeded to lean away from Mr. Gooding Jr. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. The following is a screenshot of the encounter with Cuba Gooding Jr. Oh my goodness.
Zesty.
Throughout his time with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was under an implied work for hire agreement. He was not compensated for his time living with Mr. Combs or for the songs he produced. As evidence, he was listed as a producer for the following songs on the Love album's final release: Deliver Me, Stay PT1, Reaching, What's Love, Stay a While, Moments, Need Somebody, Homecoming, and Tough Love. Mr. Combs and defendants LR, MR, UMG all benefited from Mr. Jones's worked product. They failed to compensate Mr. Jones for his work. As a result, Mr. Combs and defendants LR, MR, UMG were all unjustly enriched at the expense of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones attempted to work with Mr. Combs to secure his publishing and royalty rights for the work he completed on the Love album. Mr. Combs only offered Mr. Jones $29,000 for 13 months, thousands of hours of work, and 9 songs that made it to the Love album. Ironically, Mr. Jones was willing to take $50,000, his publishing and royalties. Mr. Combs' self-serving greed would not allow him to pay Mr. Jones an additional $21,000. Mr. Combs' deceptive business practices became so bad that Mr. Jones was left with no choice other than to make a public plea on social media for Mr. Combs to pay him for his work. After publicly requesting that Mr. Combs do the right thing and pay him fairly, Mr. Jones received an onslaught of threatening messages from Stevie J and Love Records, A&R DeForest Taylor. According to Mr. Jones, Mr. Combs is very forceful and demanding. Mr. Combs does not take no for an answer and would often threaten to inflict bodily harm on Mr. Jones if Mr. Jones did not comply with his demands. As detailed above, Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones's face.
I'm going to eat your face. Take that.
On another occasion, while standing in Mr. Combs' bedroom, Mr. Jones was forced to watch as Mr. Combs displayed his guns and bragged about getting away with shooting people. Mr. Combs shared that he was responsible for the shooting in the nightclub in New York City with rapper Shine. He shared that the artist and Mr. Combs' girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Lopez, aka J-Lo, carried the gun into the club for him and passed him the gun after he got into an altercation with another individual. Oh my gosh, there's pictures. The shooting in Chalice Records studios confirmed Mr. Combs' statements. These statements reinforced Mr. Jones's fear of Mr. Combs and strengthened Mr. Combs' dominion and control over Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones was terrified of Mr. Combs. He felt like he could not tell him no. Mr. Combs consistently made it clear that he has immense power in the music industry and with law enforcement. Mr. Combs made it clear that his head of security, Fahim Mahad, Mr. Mahad, you'll fix that. Mr. Combs made it clear that his head of security, Fahim Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad, had the power to make people and problems disappear. Mr. Combs instructs his staff to always contact Mr. Muhammad if they are ever pulled over by the police in Miami or California. Upon information and belief, Mr. Muhammad spoke with the LAPD after G was shot at CRS. The LAPD was in CRS and witnessed the blood in the restroom, and they went with the bogus claim that the shooting of G occurred outside of the studio. This was all thanks to Mr. Muhammad's connection with law enforcement. Mr. Jones had no reason to disbelieve Mr. Combs, as he had seen firsthand that the shooting of G and the subsequent silence of the LAPD and the media that Mr. Combs indeed had the power to harm him. The LAPD spent hours in CRS after the shooting of G, yet there were no arrests. Mr. Jones witnessed the LAPD in the restroom pictured above, yet no arrests were made. The morning after the shooting, Mr. Jones and several others arrived at CRS, and G's blood was still on the floor of the restroom, and Mr. Combs hired a cleaning crew to clean it up. Defendants Ethiopia, Habter Mariam, Lucian Charles Grange, Motown Records, Love Records, and Universal Music Group aided, abated, and profited off of Sean Combs' RICO enterprise. Mr. Jones recalled seeing Defendant Grange visiting Mr. Combs' home in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California. According to Mr. Jones, whenever Defendant Grange visited Mr. Combs at his homes, it would be in the evening, and he and Mr. Combs would disappear for hours in Mr. Combs' bedroom. Defendant Grange sponsored and attended several Love album listening parties at Mr. Combs' home in Los Angeles, California. These parties were sponsored by defendants MR, LR, and UMG. As evidence above, these parties had sex workers and underage girls present. During these parties, defendants Grange knew or should have known that Mr. Combs was drugging the attendees through laced bottles of De Leon tequila and Ciroc vodka. It is no secret that Mr. Combs had specific bottles of alcohol designated for females and other bottles designated for his staff, his artists, and himself. This fact was detailed by former artists and bodyguards of Mr. Combs. As a sponsor of these events, Defendant Grange had a duty and obligation to ensure that sex workers and underage girls were not present, and that Mr. Combs was not spiking the alcohol with date rape drugs. On YouTube channel, The Art of Dialogue, former bodyguard Gene Deal exposed Mr. Combs' pill mixing method used to spike cranberry juice and orange juice. According to Mr. Deal, Mr. Combs would place ecstasy and other date rape drugs in the juices. On YouTube, The Art of Dialogue, former artist Mark Curry exposed Mr. Combs spiking bottles of Moet champagne in the VIP section of nightclubs. Mr. Combs would have a set of Moet champagne bottles for his artists and a set for women. This writer has spoken with several former employees of Mr. Combs who witnessed defendant Quorum instruct her staff to lace champagne, De Leon, and Ciroc liquor bottles with ecstasy and other illicit drugs. Mr. Jones recalls seeing defendant Habtermariam visiting Mr. Combs' home in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California. According to Mr. Jones, whenever defendant Habtermariam visited Mr. Combs at his homes, it would be in the evening, and she and Mr. Combs would disappear for hours in Mr. Combs' bedroom. According to Mr. Jones, defendant Habtermariam visited Mr. Combs at defendant CRS during Mr. Combs' writing camp. Defendant Habtermariam sponsored and attended several Love album listening parties at Mr. Combs' home in Los Angeles, California. These parties were sponsored by defendants MR, LR, and UMG. As evidence above, these parties had sex workers and underage girls present. During these parties, defendant Habtermariam knew or should have known that Mr. Combs was drugging the attendees through lace bottles of De Leon tequila and Ciroc vodka. As a sponsor of these events, defendant Habtermariam had a duty and obligation to ensure that sex workers and underage girls were not present, and Mr. Combs was not spiking the alcohol with date rape drugs. Defendant Christina Quorum is the Ghislaine Maxwell to Sean Combs' Jeffrey Epstein. According to Mr. Jones, during the 13 months he lived and traveled with Mr. Combs, he witnessed Mr. Combs display and distribute guns from his bedroom closet in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, to questionable individuals dressed in all black. According to Mr. Jones, during the 13 months he lived and traveled with Mr. Combs, he witnessed defendant Quorum openly order her assistants to keep Mr. Combs high off gummies and pills. Defendant Quorum required all employees from the butler to the chef to the housekeepers to the walk around with a pouch or fanny pack filled with cocaine, GHB, ecstasy, marijuana gummies, 100 to 250 milligrams each, and Tuki, Tuci, a pink drug that is a combination of ecstasy and cocaine. Never heard of it. It was important to defendant Quorum to have Mr. Combs' drug of choice immediately ready when he asked for it. Defendant Quorum ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Combs. Defendant Quorum ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Combs and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in LA, New York City, and Miami. On multiple occasions, defendant Quorum forced Mr. Jones to carry Mr. Combs' drug pouch against his will. As a chief on the staff, defendant Quorum was instrumental in organizing and executing the RICO enterprise. Defendant Quorum had the following individuals execute the following tasks for the RICO enterprise. A. Stevie J. Recruits sex workers and attends the participants in freak-offs And then there's a 19 next to there, and then 19 says, we have a video of Mr. Combs, Stevie J, and Plaintiff Jones at a strip club. Mr. Combs is recording these videos while coaching and training Plaintiff Jones on how to recruit the sex workers. And then B, Justin Combs. He solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers would engage in freak-offs. And then C, Brendan Paul works as Mr. Combs' mule. He acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns. D, Frankie Santella works alongside Brendan. While Brendan acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns, Frankie carries the money and pays for the guns and drugs. Then we have E, Moy Bond, hires sex workers, attends and participates in freak-offs. Mr. Combs funded and used his affiliation with local gangs and gang leaders who would frequent his homes in LA and Miami to secure the drugs and guns he obtained and distributed out of his homes in LA and Miami. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of violence, threatening to eat plaintiff's face, displaying and distributing guns in plaintiff's presence, bragging about having law enforcement under control, bragging about murdering people, and bragging about bribing witnesses and jurors in the criminal case concerning the 1999 New York City nightclub shooting with Shine. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of isolation from the music and entertainment industry, parading powerful music industry executives such as defendants Houston Charles Grange, Ethiopia Habtemariam at his parties filled with sex workers, minors, and illegal drugs such as ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms. Defendants executed their RICO enterprise with threats of non-payment for work completed, fake promises of cash payments, $250,000, Producer of the Year Grammy Awards, and guaranteed access to future projects, and a $20 million home on Star Island in Miami. Mr. Combs is allowed to wreak havoc. While living and traveling with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones discovered that Mr. Combs has hidden cameras in every room of his homes. Mr. Jones believes that Mr. Combs has recordings of defendants Lucian Charles Grange, Ethiopia Habtemariam, as well as other celebrities, music label executives, politicians, and athletes. Upon information and belief, these individuals were recorded without their knowledge and consent, and as is the case with the homosexual tape of Stevie J that Mr. Combs provided to Mr. Jones, Mr. Combs possesses compromising footage of every person that has attended his freak out off parties and his house parties. Upon information and belief, due to his treasure trove of evidence he has in his possession, Mr. Combs believes that he is above the law and is untouchable. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs employs Jose Cruz as his IT director. This writer has spoken to several former employees and Mr. Combs, who confirmed that Jose Cruz is the gatekeeper to all of Mr. Combs' recordings. Upon information and belief, Jose Cruz intentionally hides behind the camera and from social media and the internet due to all of the incriminating acts he was required to record for Mr. Combs. First cause of action: conduct and participate in a RICO enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, violation of Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act, codified at all of those numbers, against defendants Lucian Charles Grange, Ethiopia Habtemariam, Sean Combs, Justin Combs, Christina Corium, Combs Global, Motown Records, Love Records, and Universal Music Group. Mr. Jones incorporates by reference all preceding paragraphs and re-alleges them as if set forth fully hereon. As respondent superior, defendants Lucian Charles Grange, Ethiopia Habtemariam, Combs Global, Motown Records, Love Records, and Universal Music Group, the respondent superior collective, and are 100% liable for the actions of Sean Combs, Justin Combs, Christina Corium, as they were acting in their capacities as the respondent superior collectives employees when they committed the acts detailed below. The respondent superior collective failed to adequately monitor, warn, or supervise the actions of Sean Combs, Justin Combs, and Christina Corium. Defendants are individuals and or entities within the meaning of person as defined in 18 U.S.C. 1961, parentheses 3. Because each is capable of holding and does hold a legal or beneficial interest in property, the association is composed of Lucian Charles Grange, Ethiopia Habtemariam, Sean Combs, Justin Combs, Christina Corium, Combs Global, Motown Records, Love Records, Universal Music Group, John and Jane Doe's 1 through 10, and ABC Corporations 1 through 10. Section 1962A makes it unlawful for any person who has received any income derived directly or indirectly from a pattern of racketeering activity or through a collection of an unlawful debt in which such person has participated as a principal within the meaning of Section 2, Title 18, United States Code, to use or invest directly or indirectly any part of such income or the proceeds of such income in the acquisition of any interest in or the establishment of operation of any enterprise which is engaged in or the activities of which affect interstate or foreign commerce. Do you want me to read all of this? They're talking just about the law right here. And then I could skip that part and then I can
Yeah, you could skip it.
Here. Defendants have unlawfully increased their profits by luring and deceiving producers, musicians, writers, creators, and artists such as plaintiff to transport drugs, ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms, transport firearms, solicit minors, exotic dancers, sex workers. I feel like that's the end of the case. Wait, let me see.
If you want to support me, make sure you go ahead and Nene Marie 37 in her inbox if you want a signed copy of my book, man.
Big D made the slap.